What's the cringiest thing you've seen a bride and groom do for their wedding? At a classmate's wedding. They were young, maybe like 22? 23? There is apparently a caking tradition in some parts of the country, where when they cut the wedding cake, the couple feed each other a bit and smear each other's faces with cake as a joke. The bride had absolutely made 1000% clear to the groom she did not want to be caked. He did it anyways. And not just a small smear, but full on smushed the slice in her face. She was stunned initially, then got up, face full of cake, yelled, "You asshole, I told you not to do that," and then ran to a back area in the reception. The groom tried to follow, but the bridesmaid's mother of the bride stopped him. So he sat at the head table awkwardly while half the wedding party rushed off with the bride. She stayed back there for like an hour. They eventually did let him back there to check on her. We could hear her crying and them arguing. The rest of the reception came to a screeching halt until one of the bride's aunts emerged and directed the servers to clear the tables and put on some music. They got divorced 2 years later. Bride shows up almost 2 hours late to her own wedding. Southern California, in an open field, no water, no shade. She shows up and wants to get married in her yoga outfit. The groom shut it down, and when she refused to change her clothes, the groom decided to leave her looking stupid, and they never got married. Edit. I spoke with my uncle and it turns out he had speculation that his fiancée was sleeping with her personal trainer. When she showed up in her yoga outfit, it was all he needed to call off the wedding. She ended up married to her personal trainer and divorced again. The groom gave a speech thanking everyone for coming that devolved in the space of about 2 minutes into a straight up roast of his new brother-in-law. They were friends, and the brother-in-law seemed to take it in good humor. But there's only so much implication of "I'm for sure going to be f-king your sister tonight" that you can take before it becomes really cringy. It didn't help that I barely knew anyone there because I was a +1. And B, I was on the table with the elderly relatives from that side of the family, who were less than amused. At the reception line, after the church wedding ceremony, the bride had a large bottle of her favorite perfume and sprayed each guest with it, female and male, whether they wanted it or not, as they entered the banquet hall. Some guests complained that the smell of perfume was so strong that they lost their appetite and couldn't partake of the banquet. They sang their vows to each other. Neither had a singing voice. Vows were generally batshit crazy, like submissive in the bedroom, and not asking about where she was going. The auto-tune microphones were a terrible idea. Their vow songs shared a chorus and it was awful, and they expected the guests to sing along with the chorus. The vows singing lasted 20 minutes. Pure cringe. I wasn't a guest. I was working the wedding. The bride got drunk and sat on some other dude's lap for 2 hours and flirted with him while the groom sat by himself at the head table with a defeated look on his face. This might be the most depressing one yet. Invite all their Facebook friends and expect 700 people and like less than 100 show up. A guy knew a couple who didn't specifically invite anyone. Just made like a public event on FB or somehow assumed people would know when where it was and show up. They were confused and offended when almost nobody came. Not the groom and bride's fault, but the pastor marrying them. Talked about his marriage and his kids for 20 minutes. He was obviously going for something of showing what marriage will be like. But he full up was talking about how his daughter, Kelsey, learned to walk this way. And his other daughter's first words were this and that. And that he and his wife make love throughout the house because that's what you do when in love, etc. Bride and groom had to stand there holding hands for 20 minutes right in front of him as the other 150 of us had to listen about his sex life and his kids. They bought an apple orchard after leaving the city to live a simpler life. And really doubled down on the apple theme. Apples everywhere. On the tables. In baskets all around the venue. On the podium where they got married. Pictures of apples hanging everywhere. Small fake trees with apples tossed under them. The dude marrying them had an apple tie on. Apples somehow incorporated into every dish for the reception. The cake was shaped like an apple. It was really f-king bizarre. They sold the orchard a couple years later because they had no idea what they were doing. The ceremony also was the name reveal. They changed their last name because they didn't want to be stuck to their heritage and didn't want anything to hold them back. Turns out they changed their name thinking they could erase their mountains of debt or at least hide from it. Turns out you can't live under two legal identities. Oh, I have two. 1. The bride decided to sing as she walked down the aisle. She was not a particularly talented singer. And she was singing over a Carrie Underwood song so we could all hear the original vocal track. She finished walking about halfway through the song and then stood there and sang the rest of the song at the groom and all we could do was sit there and watch. 2. Different wedding. They began the wedding with the groom playing an out-of-tune guitar and singing to the bride. They were sitting on chairs in front of everyone. Legit 400 people. And the bride was clearly uncomfortable, which made everyone else uncomfortable. That wedding also included a foot washing ceremony. And when the bride put her shoes back on, she tripped on her dress and fell flat on her face. They hadn't done the vows yet and the ceremony stopped for 20 minutes to deal with the nosebleed she gave herself. My cousin and his wife are super religious and maybe the two most awkward people I've ever met. They did one of those fake out first dances where it starts with a slow song then transitions to a dance number with an upbeat song. Not only is that naturally cringeworthy, the upbeat song was 5 minutes long and they just kept repeating the same moves over and over for what felt like eternity. There was no alcohol allowed at the wedding, so there was nothing to dull the pain. Not the bride and groom but the bride's father. I was the best man. They married young after she fell pregnant. It wasn't planned. But they clearly loved each other and it was the right thing for them to do in their eyes, both Christian. Anyway. Come the wedding day, I'm sat next to the bride's father at the reception and I can see he's looking at his prepared speech repeatedly. I can see phrases like not ideal. Would have preferred not to welcome you into the family in these circumstances, etc. Just before the groom gets up to give a speech, the bride's father excuses himself to nip to the loo, leaving his speech behind. I'm not ashamed to say I swiped it and then pleaded ignorance when he returned. In the end he stood up and muttered a few words about love and then sat down. I never told the groom and I'm happy to say they're still happily married 20 years later. Update, blimey. That blew up. I never expected this to be noticed, but thank you for all the very kind comments and awards. A friend of friends. Young, uber Christian small town naive girl. Meets married. Much older man with 2 kids. Falls in love. He does eventually leave his wife. Doesn't want any custody. Wedding was her hometown church. His vows were over the top about how he has never felt love before. She is the only woman he ever wanted to marry. He's been so lonely his whole life. Etc. He's literally sobbing through it all. Her turn to say her vows and she's standing there saying nothing for at least 3 beats. Then she is handed a microphone and the piano starts playing. She's made up her own song, which are her vows. After the ceremony we adjourn to the church basements for the alcohol-free reception. I'm somehow roped into serving the groom's cake. It's 2 NASCAR car cakes made with an edible photo draped over the cake shapes and impossible to cut through without mangling the cake, so I have to peel it off. My friend is cutting the bride's cake and it's a full inch or more of fondant on top of plain cake. No frosting. The buffet was potluck from her family. Food you'd expect at a kid's party. Pink punch was the only thing to drink. No dancing because of her religion. Then they left for their honeymoon at the town's only hotel, which was like a Motel 6 level dump in a 2-horse drawn carriage. This was Marizo, the bride's family. One of my first classmates to get married. We were 19, had a small reception. Mostly family and friends from high school, nothing wrong with that. They decided to auction off the garter belt. And whoever won took it off the bride. Most of us were poor college students. So the only people bidding were her dad and uncles. It was super uncomfortable. Edit. I did not expect this reaction. So to answer the most common questions. The bride's very drunk. Dad won to the tune of $500 plus money grabbed by the couple to help with honeymoon expenses. This was not Alabama, North Dakota. And this was not the normal garter tradition by any means. Just a particularly cringe-worthy version of an already cringy tradition. At the beginning of the reception, we all had to stand up and sing the national anthem. To be clear, this was in another country I'd never been to a wedding in before. So I thought, okay, maybe this is just a tradition I've never heard of before here. Then I told this to other people, and they were all like, no, that's just really weird. Double quote. Also, at that wedding the father of the groom ended his speech with what I'm sure he thought was an amazing joke on how it's easier to build a bridge to Hawaii than to understand what a woman is thinking. It would have been awkward enough had the man not also been standing between his ex and current wife as he was delivering it. I know a guy who recently made his lackeys, sorry friends, compete to be his best man. Most pretentious thing I have ever seen. Watching them grovel was so upsetting to me. I really hope when he told them all what he was doing he signed off by saying, may the best man win. I was at a wedding when I was 8 and instead of the bride and groom getting up to make their speech thanking everyone, they had done like an awards show. So the DJ opened up an envelope, announced their names. They were handed an award statue, a Barbie and Ken doll, and proceeded to thank everyone in the form of an award speech. In the right hands, it would have been funny. But the bride and groom are incredibly shy by nature, so it was just awkward. I'm in my 30s now and I still remember this. I went to a wedding once where they did a potluck. I guess it okay depending on the type of wedding. But the reception was at a fairly nice venue. The wedding couple was like an hour and a half late. And their best man didn't have a speech ready, so it went on for a very painful 15-25 minutes. Also stating in there that they're going to have great sex now that they're married. This was a devout Christian wedding with many of the friends, including me, were from church. By the time me at like table 15 got to eat, I was lucky if I got something that was kept warm in a crock pot. But everything else was room temperature. We were able to go home between the ceremony and the reception. But I bet most food had been sitting in people's cars since that morning. Oh. Also the church that she moved to did the whole no kissing before marriage thing and started making out with her new husband on the altar to the point where the pastor had to say, okay, that's enough. Double quote. The whole thing was weird. The minister, or pastor, used to date the bride and gushed about how wonderful she was. Told the groom if he ever died not to worry, he'd take care of her. I was shell shocked. I so wished I could think of a reason to ask the couple for a copy of the video of their wedding but couldn't quite find a legit one. It's a tie between my sister breaking her knee, seriously, at her own wedding dancing to the Cotton Eye Joe, and my stepsister having her reception at an honest to God truck stop while 6 months pregnant. In her defense, the food was good, but wow was it weird walking through a gas station in formal wear. Okay. So as soon as the bride and groom got out of church, everyone went to congratulate them and give gifts, which usually are flowers, alcohol plus envelopes. The bride had a pen and notebook and she signed each envelope or wrote in notebook if someone didn't give her envelope. Later, as we went to the restaurant where the party was about to start, we waited for 2 hours for the pair. Turns out they made us stop during their ride to count money. As they finally got to the party, they started complaining that they didn't make enough to pay for the party expenses and earn more. They only spent time only with the rich part of family. The poor tables didn't get the good cakes food. There was literally different food on some tables. I sat near our poor part of family. No meat or cakes made it to the table. Me and like 7 other people didn't get forks. Only spoons. Why would you give fork to someone when there's only soup for them to eat, right? Now, mind you, I gave them enough to pay for like 5 plates people and I helped them during preparations. I even baked a few cakes that I didn't get to eat in the end. Half of people got out after like 20 minutes. Bride called them all terrible for ruining her dream wedding. Worst wedding ever. And that is just a part of the whole wedding mess. I wish I had a car back then so I could go back home as well. As the wedding was terrible for many other reasons as well. Groom was cheap. Bride was a Karen. It happened at my wedding and I still look back and shake my head. 1. The pastor who we pushed to marry us found out that we had sex before marriage. He made sure to point that out during the ceremony. 2. When saying the vows I wrote, I got so damn emotional it all sounded like gibberish, and when I turned to get the ring from my best man, he was bawling his eyes out and couldn't find it. I can't imagine how PPL and the audience felt. I live in Britain, and as a child there was a show on CBBC, children's BBC, just like this. The show was called Marrying Mum and Dad. Oh lord, I hate that show. It's about these kids who get to arrange their parents' wedding. They choose the theme, the entertainment, and the cake. Naturally, the kids were always making absolutely horrible occasions. Because what did you expect? They would choose a ridiculous theme for the wedding: Australia, medieval, space, clowns, and have everyone arrive dresses appropriately. Then they make the couple do some activity or another. It ranges from bungee jumping to VR, for entertainment. Then they have the wedding and eat the cake. The worst part is that the parents have no clue what's happening. They don't know anything until the day. And the children will go out of their way to make them uncomfortable, making them eat bugs for entertainment. Everyone just has to go along with it. And you can tell all the guests are really awkward. And then at the end the couple have to say just how good their Australia themed wedding where they ate bugs was. My mom and Mill insisted on doing a stugge. A bit of theatre often to mock the bride and groom by showing embarrassing pictures from their childhood. Cringe-worthy all by itself. But we explicitly asked them not to, and they went against our wishes. So when they performed their stugge, everyone was annoyed and embarrassed. When we finally made it through that ordeal, we wanted THD party to resume. But my Mill did another stugge and we were about ready to kill her. Not the couple. The pastor kept saying our Heavenly Father, Daddy God, while marrying them. Edit. Thanks for the gold. For context, it was a military wedding. It was just the couple and the pastor. It was live streamed on Twitch. And the pastor was probably about 25. It was in Hawaii. He was wearing flip-flops. And a lei made of fake flowers. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. It's a cult. Dating is only allowed to find a marriage partner and was very monitored. To ensure no premarital touching occurred. Worst wedding was a small ceremony. It was literally her family, his family and my family in her grandma's living room. What made it the worst was the XXX kiss at the end. The groom wanted the bride inside his mouth hardcore. There was tongue in and out everywhere. Saliva and hot breathing. Complete with first date excited groping. Nobody knew where to look for 5 minutes. JWs have the worst weddings and funerals. Honestly, I dread attending them. My husband left the cult about 10 years before I met him, but he still has lots of JW family. Of course. Surprisingly, they haven't cut him off, probably because some of them rely on him financially. Sorry to blab on. It's a major thorn in my life. When I was at a wedding of my parents' friends, the groom tried to throw a decently sized piece of cake at the bride, who moved out of the way. The cake ended up hitting my 76-year-old grandma. We all had a good laugh. But we were all cringing at the same time at the missed cake attempt. Went to a wedding in the United States. This was both the bride and groom's 4th marriages to each other. They got married 4 times and divorced 3. They picked a dirty motorcycle bar, not my wedding. Theirs. Okay. But were openly giving young children alcohol and laughing at them being drunk. I asked my friend if I could leave when the bride pulled a knife out of her breasts and tried to stab the groom for having sex with a woman while they were divorced. I'm not sure if this is common in New Jersey. Other weddings I attended while in the USA were not like that. Oh, let's see. Groom changed who his best man was and didn't tell the original BM until the start of the ceremony. Bride and groom asked a guest to bartend the reception at the reception. Groom dirty danced with his stepmom, full hands on ass. Bride and groom hauled their wedding party up to do a choreographed dance to Meatloaf's Paradise by the Dashboard Lights, but didn't give them any pre-warning or teach them the dance. That song is 5 minutes long. Wedding was at a scenic boarding school campus during the summer. Guests were told dormitories were complimentary to stay in. Guests were not told there would be no bedding provided or AC in the building. Groom later emailed everyone who stayed in a dorm asking for money. Same bride and groom chose another friend's wedding reception as the right setting to yell at a third pair of mutual friends for not including them in their wedding party. I used to videotape weddings, so I've seen it all. This one couple from New Jersey were the spitting image of Snooki and JWoww's ex-husband, Roger. They were super into appearances and very over the top gaudy. During their church ceremony, they had their very white 60-year-old uncle, with Native American feathers tied into his hair, stand up and chant around the church, giving what I can only assume was some kind of blessing. It was so weird and out of place. I assume they wanted to seem deep during their ceremony. They mixed colored sand together in a vase too. Went to a wedding for my cousin. It was both of their second time getting married and they had only known each other for about 4 months. When they were getting married at the altar, the husband had a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper and the wife had a 6-pack of Mountain Dew. After the reading of the vows, the priest says you may now kiss the bride. So they kiss and then immediately hand each other one of their drinks and start to chug it. I went to a potluck wedding. The attendees kept all the food in their hot cars while at church, then when we moved to the event hall they brought it all in to be served. Potato and macaroni salad after being in a hot car for an hour. Delish. Those were the high-end dishes. Some attendees brought 2 liters of soda or bags of chips. At this same wedding they also had a dollar dance. Everyone lines up and pays for the chance to dance with the bride. They pinned dollars onto her dress. They ran out of pins, so she started stuffing dollar bills into her bra. My family is from an area in PA where the dollar dance is common, perhaps less so these days, but the money goes in a basket and you get a shot of whiskey, sometimes a cigar, and you dance with the bride just long enough to compliment and congratulate her. Also, anybody putting less than a $20 in the basket would be taken out back and beaten.